I'm Lisa Hoskins. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I work for an organization called the Center for Volunteer Caregiving that serves older adults in Wake County. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about navigating the caregiver journey and trying to address the various areas that you might be on that journey. So we'll talk a little bit about early stages, self-care, remission, as well as grief. So obviously, every journey is unique and different. So all of your experiences will have some similarities, but certainly be your own unique experience. And with us, we all bring, all of the past tools that we've used, how we've coped with things in the past, and all of our past experiences will be with us as we start this new journey. So for early stages of diagnosis, I think it's helpful. I know it can be extremely overwhelming. So to try to really take it one step at a time, try not to think too far ahead or, too many worst case scenarios or best case scenarios, but to just sort of take it step by step as you get the information that you're getting. And really start to mentally prepare for sitting with uncertainty, which none of us like. It's not a very comfortable feeling to be uncertain about what to expect, but it will be necessary to be a little bit more comfortable with that. I think three things that are really important to remember, and I think this is foundational, is the self-compassion. Really allowing yourself a lot of grace and a lot of patience. You're dealing with a very difficult situation. And when I say do not judge, I mostly am saying that about yourself. We are really, really hard on ourselves. So try not to judge, or evaluate how you feel like you're doing. You're doing good, you're doing bad. Just try to just be where you are with what you're taking in at that moment, and ask yourself, what do I need right now for me to feel better, to feel like I'm in control, to feel like I have, some leg in the game, what do I need? And focusing on what brings you meaning and purpose as well. What things are important to you? What values are important to you? Those will remain the same regardless of what is going on. And allow yourself to feel and process whatever emotions are coming to you. Sometimes we try to fight against the emotions, or we feel badly that we feel a certain way. Try to avoid that and really just acknowledge and allow yourself to feel all the things, because I'm sure you're going to feel many different things. And it's okay, whatever you're feeling. We tend to say this is good or bad. We tend to make things very black and white. And really, emotions are not good or bad. They just are. And you may be feeling anger or guilt or resentment or anxiety. So lots of complicated emotions may be coming out in you. So it's okay. Like just be comfortable with that and try to sit with that. I also think it's important to manage what you take in. So of course, get the facts about the diagnosis, the condition, the treatments, get the facts from a reputable source. Try not to spend too much time on the internet. And just know that it takes us humans a while to really wrap our heads around a serious event, especially one that's around our health or around the health of a loved one. So it's going to take some processing time. You might have to hear things several different times, or think through a situation several different times. It's going to be overwhelming. And when we feel overwhelmed, we often sort of shut down. We get foggy brain. So it can be a little harder to process. And, when you've had enough, just try to listen to yourself and say, okay, I'm on information overload. I don't want to think about this anymore. I'm going to go read a book on an entirely different topic, or I'm going to go take a walk. So this handout just sort of talks a little bit more about our difficult emotions. And really the first step is being aware that you're having an emotion, identifying where you sense that in your body. So, you might have anxiety and maybe you feel that in your chest, or in your breathing. Then you might want to identify and label that emotion. So say, okay, I'm feeling anxious. This is what I'm feeling right now. Next is to accept those emotions. So again, let's not fight against the emotion. It is there. And so we're going to accept that that emotion is there. We are going to also realize that none of our emotions are permanent. They're all impermanent. It will go away and you will not feel this way forever. And you might want to ask, inquire and investigate, ask yourself some questions. Well, why am I feeling anxious? Like, what is bringing that on? And that just helps with our self-awareness piece of like, what is creating some of those emotions? And again, let go of the need to control that, be open to the outcome of the emotions and what unfolds. Again, a lot of our angst comes from trying to fight against how we feel versus, accepting it and going with it and working through that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about telling people about a diagnosis, which, can be sort of a difficult thing for people. So these are, there's no right or wrong time to tell somebody. So it's really when you're feeling comfortable and ready to do so. And not everyone needs to know everything at the same time. So of course, you're going to tell some more detailed information to really close friends or family than you will be telling the mailman or, somebody that you may not know as much. So, you get to determine how much a person knows or how much you tell them. And it's good to really focus on what your energy and needs are. You're the most important person and the loved one that has lung cancer. You two are the most important people. So prioritizing your energy and needs and how you tell people, when you tell people, that really should come first. Like, what's the most comfortable for you? And then you feel like you want to tackle at that particular moment. And then using clear language, just sort of saying what it is, right? Just not really beating around the bush. And since you're the gatekeeper of all this information, I mean, there's lots of ways, of course, to tell people. So you can tell somebody one-on-one individually. You could tell somebody with a friend with you or a family member, clergy, a professional, if you feel like that would be necessary. You could tell people in a group setting. So you tell more people, at once about it. Or you could give someone else permission to share that news with people. So you've got lots of different choices on that. And again, you might not want to tell people right away as well. You might want to sit on that information while you're processing it and taking it in before you, make a big announcement about everything. Oop. Okay. Talking to children. So there's some good suggestions out there. And one is to talk in age appropriate language. And that might be helpful to talk to a professional about, somebody that perhaps works in the bereavement department at hospice that deals with grief and talking to children about illness, so that you know what that means. Like what is age appropriate for a 4-year-old? What is age appropriate for a 12-year-old? Sort of talking to a professional to get an understanding of what that might look like. And in talking to children, of course, it's best to be simple and honest. Again, not beating around the bush, just kind of putting it out there in simple terms, and being honest. You don't know what's going to happen. You're not sure, what's going to happen. And it's okay to show your emotions. Sometimes we feel like when we talk to children, we have to be very stoic and we should not be upset. We should be very calm. But it's okay for them to see that you have emotions. I mean, it's good for children to see that. So it's okay if you are emotional and it's difficult for you. It's actually a good model for that child to see that you are dealing with your emotions that way. Encourage questions. And know that you will probably have to repeat information a lot. So you might get the same questions over and over, and you might have to repeat information. And letting children know what's going on is extremely helpful because children will know something is going on. So sometimes adults think that if we just keep it, we don't tell the child that will make it easier for them, or, we don't want to burden them with the information. But children, they do know, and the more information they get is better, because otherwise their minds will go to a fantastical place where they are creating all sorts of stories in their mind. They might think it's their fault. They might, think all sorts of things. So it's important to talk to them so they're not creating different and untrue stories in their mind. So really letting them know it's not their fault. It's not, daddy's not sick because you were bad yesterday, or you got in trouble, things like that. And of course, do not make promises that you cannot keep. Again, you're being honest. So that may be, I don't know the answer to that question, but we will, keep you updated on the progress when we know more information. We're going to touch briefly on self-care. So I think, when we have a difficult diagnosis, allowing people in, sometimes that can be really difficult to do. And some of us have larger support systems than others. But if we do have a support network and people, allow them in, because I'm sure people that care about you are want to know what's going on and want to be helpful. So setting up a support network can be very helpful. And that could be professionals and friends and neighbors, and your community of faith, just different areas of your life. And sometimes, when people ask you, well, what can I do? What can I do to help you? It's often not helpful to put that on the caregiver. So I usually try to tell people that are wanting to be helpful to come up with their own idea of what that would look like. However, if somebody asks you and you can give them something very specific, you can say, well, we're going to be at an appointment till late on Wednesday. Could you bring dinner by? That would be great. Or, something like that. Like if they're asking, you can give them something to do. Sometimes we feel bad asking for people, but if they're offering, I think it's good to give them a tangible task. You might want to consider starting a caring bridge, which is that website where one person can write an update and then everybody else can kind of you share the link and then other people can read the update. So you're not having to repeat information constantly, 15 different times. And a lot of times someone will have a close family member, a friend that does that for them. So they're not having to do that piece of it. And again, there's another website called Lots of Helping Hands. And there's various ones like that, but it's one, if you have a larger social network, you can create this website, you can put jobs on a calendar and your friends can go on the calendar. You invite who you want. So it's specific to the people that you want on there. And then they can pick up the various jobs that you have. And friends can also help manage that. So then you are getting some of those needs met with other people kind of helping to coordinate and manage that for you. So there's a couple nice ways of doing that can keep your energy where it needs to be and not in that. Your self-care is very important, and caregivers often neglect this because they're so focused on the care for their loved one. But if you want to be in this for the long haul and you want to be in it to help your loved one who's sick, you're going to also have to care for yourself. That's part of taking care of them. So, pace yourself and manage priorities and realize that you're not going to be able to do all the things that you had done prior to this diagnosis. We have to be realistic about what we can do. And most of us think we're superhuman, but knowing that we have limits, and you're carrying a big load, you're carrying a lot. So you want to just do what you got to do, and pace yourself along the way. Try to be healthy as much as you can, and then really creating a self-care list of what fills your cup specifically. So what has comforted you in the past? What brings you meaning and purpose? Creating a list of little things like that. And it could be simple things like, I like having a hot cup of tea. I'm going to sit down for 15 minutes and just drink my tea on the porch. Things like that. Just little things that can help soothe you as you're, when you need that moment. And then being open to trying new coping strategies that, you can use the things that have worked for you before, which is great, but also trying some new ones. So that might be, if you haven't already, practicing meditation or deep breathing exercises. Deep breathing is a really good way when we're feeling overwhelmed and stressed to just stop for a moment and just take some time to really just focus on slowing our breath and taking some deep breaths. That can help a lot in just sort of reducing that anxiety. Writing in a journal can be extremely helpful because a lot of those emotions, your processing can come out in that, in journaling, that journey. Of course, seeking professional mental health help, seeing a therapist to talk through what's going on. And you might want to do things like, read or do crossword puzzles or something that's going to keep your mind stimulated and help you be mindfully focused on a task that you want to do. Obviously, leaning on your faith or spirituality can be very helpful. And remaining involved with work and leisure activities as much so that you can have a normal life too, that you're still carrying on with some of the things that you had done before this diagnosis came to you. So remission, hopefully there will be a remission. And so how do you focus on that living and doing and enjoying what you want to do when you have that fear, kind of in the back of your mind? So again, it's to acknowledge, that you might have some fears and emotions. It might be hard to relax while you're in this stage because you just don't know what's going to happen. So you can take control of the things like influencing your health and trying to do things that are healthy for you and your loved one. Trying to live in the moment as much as you can. I know we say that all the time, and it is difficult, but again, trying to just be, thankful and living in that moment. And appreciating that time that you've been given, not taking things for granted, which I'm sure a lot of people would. You probably have you've had an experience that gives you a little bit of new insight into that, of not taking life for granted. Staying positive and hopeful. It doesn't mean we're talking about toxic positivity. We don't mean like overly positive. It doesn't mean you can't feel down. But just generally trying to have more of a positive outlook and a more hopeful outlook makes us feel better than if we had a negative one, of course. And with a perspective shift, none of us on the planet know what the future holds. And there certainly are no guarantees for any of us. So again, you're living in the moment. And getting comfortable again with living in that uncertainty of what's going to have or happen in the future. So it can be really difficult, and there may be times where you are triggered. And oftentimes that could be if you're getting a checkup or a scan to see how things are going. That can definitely trigger a lot of fears and emotions and anxiety. So just be aware of those times that, might be a little bit more difficult. So grief. So there is a lot of grief, different types of them. So one is anticipatory grief. So that means, of course, we are sort of grieving something before the loss, right? So sometimes if a person's on hospice, they have anticipatory grief of what is going to happen to their loved one. We also have a lot of accumulated loss that are those little and not so little losses along the way with serious illness. So there's grief. Grief is going to be present from the very beginning of that journey. As we seek to adjust to all these life changes, there's going to be grief that life is different. There might be grief that you're losing the roles that you have as husband and wife or child and parent. There's a lot to grieve along the way because there's going to be a lot of changes there. So just know that will be part of your journey. And then I did want to mention, hospice, of course. So a lot of people are scared of the word hospice, but oftentimes when someone goes on hospice services, they actually improve in their condition because they are getting better care than they were getting before, or more focused care. It's also ideal to get on hospice earlier. So it's not designed for someone to go on hospice like the last week or two when they're really, you can certainly do that. You can certainly go on hospice, but the idea is really to try to get on there earlier so that you're getting the care, you're getting the focus on the quality of care and feeling better and quality of life and managing symptoms along the way. Versus, being in crisis mode at the very, very end and then having to get on hospice, at the very end. Hospices, as I mentioned earlier, are also good because they have bereavement departments. And oftentimes these bereavement departments will have some children's programming and a library of materials. And that's where the age appropriate, comes into play, is that they'll have books for different aged children that not necessarily talk about death, but it talks about things, the illness and loss in general, and things like that that might be helpful to children. So a hospice is a wonderful resource at any stage, to use some of those resources, especially if you have children. So the summary is, you all are the experts of you and what you need during this difficult time. And accepting where you are in the journey and having self-compassion and awareness is fundamental to your mental health and ability to cope. It doesn't mean you have to accept that you have this diagnosis, but you're accepting where you are in the journey and how you're doing and how you're feeling. All right, well, that concludes my presentation, and we have a caregiver speaking afterwards, I believe, who would be the true expert of all of this.
Hi, I'm Angela Nicholson, and I am a caregiver for my husband. His name is Brian. And Lisa, your presentation was wonderful. There were so many things in there that I could relate to, and just things that sounded so familiar. So thank you for all of that wonderful information. Brian, what I was gonna do is kind of tell you a little bit about our journey and some of the things that we ran into along the way, and a lot of it is gonna sound familiar with what Lisa was just sharing. But Brian was diagnosed in 2014 in June, so we are coming up on our 10-year survivorship mark, which we are very excited about. He was 36 at the time, and in probably the best shape of his life. He was in running marathons and doing CrossFit, and lung cancer was the last thing on our radar. But he developed a cough that just would not go away. And we kept going to the doctor, and they went through all the things that you would expect. Oh, it's some kind of new allergy that you've picked up. And then it was, oh, maybe it's adult onset asthma. And then it's an odd form of pneumonia. It took about a year and a half, 2 years to get to the diagnosis. So as that time passed, that cough just progressively got worse and became very productive. It impacted his sleep. It definitely was where we were like, okay, we've got to figure something out. So jumping forward through more scans and more tests, we finally kind of pushed and said, hey, something different has to be done. You keep saying that there's nothing there, but nothing's improving. It's just getting worse. So they finally did a CT scan, and the image was immediately telling. The pulmonologist really didn't even have any words. He just looked at Brian and said, I'm going to step across the hall and have a conversation with a surgeon. So that kicked off our journey of really knowing more about what was going on. And so we got scheduled for a surgery. Everything moved really quick. We had the surgery on Monday. They took a little wedge biopsy. We got the diagnosis on Tuesday that it was definitely cancer. We were at the PET scan by Friday, and we met with our team of doctors the next week to find out that it was stage 4 non-small cell adenocarcinoma, and that the tumor was significantly large, taking up the majority of his right lower lobe. So at the time, I think I mentioned our kids were 5 and 8. So we did start navigating that. How, when, what do we tell the kids? Same questions for family, for friends. And we were both on different pages for that. So that made it an interesting navigation and conversations. And I'll kind of talk about some of the surprises along the way, and that was definitely one of them, and how we both reacted to that. But after the diagnosis, we worked with our team, who was absolutely amazing, at Duke Raleigh, and went through about 2.5, 3 years of chemo. And that was an every 3 week schedule and 4 surgeries and just lots of, things along the way, scans, conversations, difficult conversations, positive conversations, all of those emotions, like Lisa was mentioning. In between, we were fortunate enough that lung cancer research and things were starting to get a little bit more of a foothold than they had in the past. And lots of new biomarker testings were coming out. And we were able to send off his tissue samples for those to try to see if we could figure out where this came from and how it came to be. And even though none of those have ever really given us any answers, it's still encouraging whenever a new line of biomarkers is identified in a test. And in our 10 years, it's been incredible to see what was available in 2014 versus what's available now. And that's just been so encouraging. Um, and so in 2018, he was given the no evidence of disease, which we were excited about. We did continue regular scans and stayed, of course, very close with our team and oncologist. And, you just kind of keep that in the back of your mind no matter what's going on. And sure enough, in November last year, a new spot was detected. So we are back navigating um, a, a a spot that you didn't hope to hear about, but we are. So we're back in the fight, which is good because that's where we thrive. Some of the surprises that I mentioned along the way um, is how we reacted. I typically am somebody that keeps stuff, especially things like health, very close to the vest. I don't like to share that information. I have maybe one or two people that I will talk to about things like that in my life and in my circles. And for whatever reason with this, I immediately wanted to start talking to people and sharing it. I think mainly because I was so taken aback by the diagnosis and it was so unexpected. I didn't know anything about navigating a cancer diagnosis. Brian was young, our kids were young. I just felt lost and confused. And I think I was just seeking some sort of grounding. So I immediately wanted to tell people, and he was, who usually is very talkative about these things, um, more reserved, and I need to process this kind of headspace. So we kind of had to find a happy place for the two of us on that. Um, the one area that we were able to kind of be on the same page, which worked out well, was for the kids. We both, of course, they needed to know why daddy was in the hospital and we weren't at home and things like that. But we didn't want to drop the cancer word on them at their ages. And so we took the approach that daddy is sick. He has some things in his lungs that the doctors are looking at, kind of just kept it very simple and broad. And I actually really did not tell them for probably 3 years that it was cancer. Um, Even though they knew we were involved with Lung Cancer Initiative, it never really came up. I don't think they quite made the connection at their ages. And for us and our family, that worked well. But, um, that is definitely a very specific thing for each family to try to navigate based on ages and how kids handle things. Um, One of the other surprises for me was that I typically have some kind of background noise, music. I'll just put on a show that I've seen 1,000 times. So it's just kind of a white noise type thing. And once he was diagnosed, I wanted complete silence. Any extra noise completely threw me. So it was interesting to even come to that realization for myself that my normal coping mechanisms were not working for my headspace with the diagnosis. So it's really interesting as a caregiver to learn how I was handling it when I would take the time to stop and think about it, because of course I'm focused on how is he handling this? How is he processing this? How are the kids going to handle this? How are our parents going to handle this? But when I would stop for a second and realize, okay, I don't think I'm in a good place right now. And then you go to your go-tos and realize those aren't working. Like the music or the background noise overstimulated me, and I would feel like my skin was crawling. So that was interesting from the caregiver perspective of taking a second to figure out what was working for me and what wasn't. Um, Lots of frustrations along the way that I didn't really, well, couldn't anticipate because you don't know, but things like when you would tell somebody and their first reaction wasn't, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I hate to hear that. It was, oh, well, I didn't even know he was a smoker, or how long has he smoked? Or, they would just ask things that you were like, oh, even if he was, why is that relevant? Those aren't relevant questions as to what I'm trying to share. So that would get really frustrating, and it would start to deter me from telling people and sharing it because you didn't want to hear the questions about, well, what did he do to cause this? That's not what, doesn't matter. um, and I guess finding out too, just the stigma around lung cancer as a caregiver was super frustrating because you want your loved one to have all the best that's available. And then when you see the numbers and what's being poured into other cancers that aren't impacting as many people across the world, you're kind of like, why does my husband, my loved one, whoever it is, not have that level of resources and care and options? So then you're kind of absorbing that even more than they are, because they're just focused on doing the infusion and what are, that kind of stuff. You're the eyes and ears and the brain because they can't process it, which would be expected. They just need to show up and get stuck. The nurses always laugh. They were like, "Boy, I think you like to see your husband get stuck." Because I was like, "He's supposed to get this shot today, and he's supposed to get this, and you need to give him this." And they're like, "That's a lot of needle." I'm like, "Yep, just stick them right on in." But that was one thing that really got us through is we kept a good sense of humor about it. We treated our infusions like dates. We would plan them. What are we going to have for lunch? What movies are we going to watch? So we kind of just made it a special time just for us. And that was a really good um, coping mechanism for us, because then we looked forward to it every 3 weeks. We knew we're going to have this dedicated time together, and oh, we're going to get to catch up on Frasier or whatever it was. We would pick little things that we could look forward to during that time. And we tell people all the time that we would have never chosen a cancer diagnosis, but it actually has been an incredible blessing in our lives. It's brought so many amazing people into our circles, and LCI, which we were so fortunate to get introduced to in the first 2 weeks of our diagnosis, and just the community and support that they've provided. So I think finding that grounding and that community that can wrap their arms around you, understanding what you're going through, is critical, especially for the caregiver. I mean, it's been a huge support for Brian as well, but also having people that I can connect with that I know are going through the same thing I am from that different perspective. So that's been huge. And I think different people are going to find different ways. I've certainly run into people along the journey that they have gone through this diagnosis and they don't get plugged in, and it may not be what they need at that time, but um, I also feel like they don't quite seem to find a settling in that community feel. They feel very alone. So you want to just encourage people to find that space that really helps them.